นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ And blessings to you all. I just walked over to the meditation hall here, and there's a beautiful moon in the sky tonight. It's not quite a full moon. That will happen in a few days on the day we call Asalaha Puja, the full moon day in July, that we celebrate the first teaching of the Buddha. But nevertheless, the moon is still bright with a nice halo around it. And the air is cold because it's winter here. And today we had a ordination ceremony. 2 monks and a novice monk joined the Sangha. One of them travelled over from New Zealand to take ordination. The other 2 are from Melbourne. And it's always a good reminder when we see or participate in an ordination of a Buddhist monk or nun. It's a reminder of the purpose of the Buddhist practice, what the goal is. Because when you ordain, you make a statement that you're going to practice for Nibbana, for the end of suffering. And you go through in the ordination, just see whether the candidate is suitable and ready, and if they have faith in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and they're told what their requisites are, what they'll be able to use as a Buddhist monk. Robes, a bowl, simple accommodation. They're told what not to do. So we're celibate, so we're not allowed to engage in sexual intercourse. We're not allowed to steal, kill. We can't lie about our attainments either. And these are what takes place in the ceremony, ordination ceremony of a Buddhist monk. So all the monks and the laity participating, they get a chance to sort of review what the purpose of the Buddhist monk's life is. And that can help us all. Why do we do it? We do it because we all want to go beyond suffering, end stress, end suffering for ourselves, and cultivate the good qualities of the heart. And this is a lifestyle that's very suitable for that. Living in the forest, in a quiet place. It's not perfect, but it's very suitable environment for developing yourself in a good way, developing the mind, practicing this path. It reminded me of when I first wanted to become a Buddhist monk. One of the hardest things is just getting to the point where you make that decision. Very similar to practicing meditation. Most people say the hardest thing about meditation is just starting, just making the decision to do it. Because beforehand your mind is full of doubts and excuses and worries. So I can remember before I became a Buddhist monk, I had the thought, I was wondering what's it like eating 1 meal a day, not just for a short time, for a retreat, say, but for the rest of your life. What happens? Do you wither away and die? So I had that thought. But when I went to stay in the monastery, I realized it's quite possible to live on 1 meal a day. And Of course, some places the meal is better supported than others, but generally Buddhists are very kind to Sangha, and wherever you go, people will help you and you get enough food. So it's really not that difficult. You get enough food even if you only eat at one sitting, and it actually has many benefits because you frees up a lot of time in the rest of the day where you don't have to concern yourself with food and eating and clearing up, cooking, clearing up, and all those sort of things. It keeps your life very simple. So it makes you easy to look after. And that was one of the intentions of the Buddha, was to make the Sangha easy to look after. And it helps you develop a sense of contentment. And one of the things that keeps you in the robes and keeps you practicing this path is contentment with what you're doing. It may not always be easy. You certainly have a certain amount of enjoyment and happiness, but there's also obstacles as well. But contentment means contentment with the lifestyle and the opportunity to practice whatever's coming up, good or bad, peaceful or not in your mind. And that's the same quality you need whether you're ordained or a lay person, lay practitioner. If you're meditating, you need to develop this sense of being content to practice. Finding contentment as you practice whatever's coming up in your mind. And this isn't always easy to achieve, is it? Because we're so full of ideals and how we think we should be and how we think our meditation should be. Or if you become a monk or a nun, your ideas about how you think the life should be. And this straight away takes away this feeling of contentment. And we start to doubt or wonder or be critical of ourselves. The modern word is we judge ourselves. So you start meditating, and if your mind is not very peaceful, you often start complaining about yourself or looking down on yourself, criticizing yourself, feeling bad about how your meditation is or how your mind is and what you're thinking, what's going on. So we actually have to cultivate contentment. And one way you can do that as you practice is just to focus, we say focus on the little things, the small things. When we focus on the big picture too much, we start looking at the results we expect to get from our practice, what we want. We want nibbana, we want peace, we want states of samadhi, we want insight, we want knowledge. Or some people even want more than that, they want psychic powers. It's a common one. The kids love to ask that. They say, if I meditate, will I be able to fly through the air? Will I be able to read other people's minds, know the future, whatever? Often we focus just on the big things and the ideals and the goals and the results that we want, and we forget the little things. But where contentment comes, contentment in the practice is often with the small things. And bringing the mind back to the present moment, one breath in, one breath out. Rather than thinking, when am I going to get peaceful and experience a state of samadhi? Just putting attention into the causes for that, which is being mindful of one breath in, one breath out. Learning how to come back to the present moment and the small things, bringing up effort, putting effort into being mindful of the one breath in, one breath out, rather than following the desires of the mind that's thinking more about what it's going to be like when you're enlightened in the future. Because the reality is not like that, is it? You practice from moment to moment, day by day, and you're not enlightened yet. You have to accept that. Now, if you're a new monk, probably your biggest problem is just learning to put your robe on properly, learning to eat in a bowl, learning to get up in the morning to meditate, all the sort of very basic, simple things. You're not yet on the verge of enlightenment. You're just learning very ordinary things. But actually out of those small little things, like learning to mindfully put on your robe, eat your meal in your bowl, walk through the forest, sweep leaves and all the things, these ordinary things that we do, out of that many good things arise. But you have to find contentment in often very ordinary, simple, small things. It's the same with meditation. You have to learn to be content with what's arising in your mind in the present moment. Whether it's very high and refined thoughts about Nibbana, well, you have to accept that if that's what you are thinking about, or very coarse, deluded thoughts, you're full of anger or lust or desire for something, or anxiety and fear, whatever the state of mind you're experiencing, that's what you have to deal with. And that's where you have to find contentment. Be content to establish mindfulness in the present moment, whatever is coming up in your experience. Even if it's physical pain, in order to get beyond and understand pain and get beyond it and be mindful of it, you have to accept it. You have to take it as your teacher and learn from it and look at your mind, how it's reacting to a painful feeling, for example. So everything is teaching us. This is something Ajahn Chah used to emphasize, to see that if you're practicing this path, you're learning from your experience. Whether you're a monk living in the forest or you're meditating in the middle of a busy city, doesn't matter. Everything is teaching you. Everything can be learned from. And one of our best teachers is dukkha. We call Ajahn dukkha, Ajahn suffering. People in Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, we call teachers Ajahn, from the word acharya, teacher. But we also have the internal teachers in our own mind, those feelings of pain and stress, those thoughts that are not peaceful, the disturbing states of mind. These are all our ajahns, our teachers. And often dukkha, or suffering and stress, is the best teacher because it's so obvious and it's unpleasant and we don't want it. So the Buddha said, that somebody who has a bit of merit, has some clarity, they start seeking a way out of their pain, their suffering, when they notice their suffering. You might say that's the beginning of insight or wisdom. You start seeking for the end of suffering once you've realized you're suffering. So in that sense, we don't have to be afraid of dukkha, and we can be quite content to be learning from the dukkha of our experience when we meditate. Or if you come into the robes as a Buddhist monk, you almost certainly will experience some difficulties, frustrations. But if you have the attitude that this is where you're learning, and you're content to be learning even from pain and suffering, then immediately you turn it into something better, something good. As I was saying, when I first ordained, the very first day when I ordained as a novice monk, the biggest problem was just learning how to wear the monk's robe. And it's not that complicated, but it takes practice. And it actually took me quite a few weeks before I could wear it properly. And in that period of time, I'd walk around the monastery, or I'd go out on alms round into the village with the other monks who were much more experienced than me, and they could wear their robes properly, and I would be wearing my robe badly, and it would be falling off or dragging along the ground. So they'd call me road sweeper because I was sweeping the road with my robe. And you have to deal with your own reactions, disappointment that you can't do something that's actually not that difficult, just wearing a robe. Comparisons with other people, why can they wear it well when I can't? Why are my hands and arms so poorly coordinated? You judge yourself, you compare yourself to others, and very easily you experience suffering. Actually putting a robe on or a robe falling off is not that painful or difficult, but it's what you think about it is the suffering, isn't it? Judging yourself, criticizing yourself, feeling bad about yourself. And then one monk actually told me, he said, all the teachers, they say, if you come to ordain as a Buddhist monk, it means you've got a lot of merit, a lot of good karma from the past. Probably means you've been a Buddhist monk in a past life already. So I was thinking, if I've been a Buddhist monk in a past life already, how come my robe won't stay on? If I learned how to do it last life, then surely this life I should be a natural, it should be easy. But that's some things you have to relearn, don't you? It's like that question people have, they say, if your last life you attained Sotapanna, you became a stream enterer, why, when you're born in this life, do you still have suffering and problems and have to learn the Dhamma and go through all the difficulties? Well, that's nature, isn't it? Even you learn something last life, some of that knowledge and experience gets wiped out, doesn't it? So this life you have to learn it again, but maybe you can learn it a little quicker, a little easier. Like kids when they start playing the piano, and they can play really well when they are only 4 years old. They can play really well. You think, oh, how can they do that? Well, perhaps they've learnt it from last life, or they've already done it in last life, and they're picking it up again. But you have to relearn things, don't you? Even a kid who becomes a genius on the piano still has to practice, still has to do it. And meditation is the same. If you're practicing meditation, you've probably done it before in a past life. And that's why you think of doing it this life. That's why you look for Buddhism, Buddhist teachings, Buddhist meditation. You've already got an affinity with it from the past. It's not absolutely sure, but most likely that's the case. But you still have to do your practice again. It's not like you just sit down and it's all going to fall into place. You still have to practice. And just as you're practicing now in this life, if you make the effort, you start meditating or you become a Buddhist monk, you're making good causes that will also bring their results not only in this life but in future lives if you haven't reached Nibbana yet. But our suffering, our problems, our difficulties that we encounter as we start to become more aware of ourselves, that's where we learn. They're our teachers. If you could do it already, then you wouldn't need to practice. If you were already enlightened, your mind was peaceful, everything was smooth, even no problems, you wouldn't need to practice, would you? It's the difficulties, the obstacles that come up that's where we learn. And they're usually our best teachers. So when you meditate, you've got 5 really good teachers. They're called the 5 Hindrances. So sometimes they say they're like 5 bad guys. That's sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness, anxiety, and skeptical doubt. And they're like these 5 bad guys who just keep coming at you, one after another. You get rid of one, sort one out, and then another one comes. Just like sort of when in those kung fu movies or martial arts movies, when you got 5 baddies, you got to sort them all out one after another. So it's quite tiring. But these are where you learn. These are your teachers. So you've just sorted out your anger, and then your mind goes into desire. You ask any monk living in the forest, they'll understand this point. They spent a long time working with their sleepiness, say, they've been sitting meditation, sleepy, and then they just get through it, the mind starts to brighten, and then they start thinking about something they like or want. They have suddenly beset by lust or desire for food or some imagination about travel, going somewhere or whatever. And then they work with that a bit, and then, now they feel self-critical, maybe get caught into doubt, and it seems to go on and on, one thing after another. But this is where we have to practice. This is where we have to develop our patience and our effort, and just work on whatever is coming up in the mind at that moment. If you look too far into the future, you'll make yourself feel disappointed or depressed, won't you? It'll seem too hard if you think, I've got to spend the rest of my life fighting with all these different states of mind, all this suffering, all this stress, the restlessness. You'll probably make yourself feel depressed and won't want to do it. But if you just say, I'm just going to work on whatever's coming up in my mind right now, this is good enough. So if it is ill will, I'll work with that to let go of it. If I can see the ill will, recognize it, I'll work to let go of it. Well, that's good enough, just work with that. You don't have to think about other things that are going to come up in the future that haven't happened yet. We love to do that as human beings. It's part of our sort of instinct, intuition, isn't it? We're always predicting bad things that can happen, bad scenarios, bad possibilities, things that worry us. We have to set that aside and just see what's coming up right now. So as you practice meditation, just work on one breath in, one breath out is good enough. And maybe just make one small victory, already that makes your day a bit better, doesn't it? If you manage to bring up some mindfulness and recognize a negative thought directed to yourself, somebody else, or something in the world, but you recognize it, bring up enough mindfulness, enough clarity, and say, this is suffering, let it go. Your mind is strong enough to do that. Well, that's good enough, isn't it? You let it go once. Some people will say, I know it's going to come back, what's the point? I'm going to get angry again, I'm going to have my desires again. And already they start sort of undermining their own efforts. Sometimes we're too clever. We've seen these problems before, and then we say, even if I make the effort to let go now, it's just going to get back at me later. And we go very easily into kind of a gloomy, depressed kind of way of thinking. Well, you have to learn even to catch that way of thinking and just say, no, set that aside and come back to the present moment, and whatever's coming up, that's all I need to deal with. I don't need to deal with tomorrow's suffering because it hasn't happened yet. And it may not happen. Certainly won't happen in the way you think it will, because you can't predict. All you really need to do is work on what's coming up right now, right here, right now. If it's pain in the legs that's bothering you, well, that's what you work with, and your reaction to it. And you try to establish some mindfulness, and you may find sometimes the pain disappears, or at least becomes tolerable for a while. If it's unpleasant memories of things you've done that went wrong or caused yourself or someone else some suffering, that's what you're dealing with. How to deal with unpleasant memories, feelings of guilt, feelings of self-criticism or anger, ill will towards someone else. That's what you're dealing with if that's what's coming up. That's your teacher. If you keep doing this, you'll get better at dealing with these 5 enemies, these 5 different competitors. They're competing for the space in your mind. Your mind is like this empty space, and it's really up to you what you let fill that space up. So if your mindfulness slips, your wisdom disappears, then you tend to fill up the space with dukkha, with suffering. Greed for things that agitates you, it really makes you feel uncomfortable. Greed and desire can be like that. It's so strong, you can't settle down. Anger, ill will is usually pretty obvious, isn't it? When it's in your mind, it's unpleasant feeling, the body gets tense, the breath is affected, and your thoughts tend to be negative. Sloth and torpor is its own suffering. When you're caught into sleepiness, drowsiness, you don't know anything, you can't see anything, can't understand anything at that time. Restlessness, anxiety has its own suffering. All these hindrances, whatever they are, you just need to know each one when it comes up at that time. And you don't need to jump ahead and worry about what hasn't arisen yet. You just learn through experience how to deal with each one. And you treat it as something to be understood and abandoned, let go of. It's almost like a task, isn't it? If you're suffering with anger or worry, how can I overcome this? How can I let this go? And you just make that your task for the moment. You don't have to think about what you're going to do later in the day or tomorrow when you have anxiety at some other time, but you just work on it right now as it's arising. And that maybe is doable, that's possible, because it's possible to bring up mindfulness in the present moment, and as soon as you establish a bit more mindfulness, whatever the hindrance is, it will just drop away, because it can't stay in the mind at the same time. You may say to yourself, oh, it's only going to come back, and you kind of give in to it again, almost kind of invite it back in because of habit. You say, oh, this is just going to return, I know, I'm not really letting go of it. But you just keep doing the practice, keep establishing mindfulness, returning to the breath, say, until the mind sticks with the breath, if that's your meditation, and lets go. And then maybe completely lets go at that time, and the anger or the anxiety just disappears. And you know it disappears because you're still mindful, you're still awake, you're still there, you haven't gone anywhere. And that's how really strong insight arises when you see something that was causing you suffering arise but then cease. You let go of it and you know, I'll let go of that, it's gone from your mind. And you're mindful, you're aware of that. That's a lesson that's really powerful in your mind. It's a powerful conditioning force for the future. And when the teachers say, oh, if you've come to meditate, it probably means you've been meditating before in past life. It means you've done this very act before. And now you can repeat it, and you can, little by little, you get better at it. You understand how to do it better, you get to know yourself, and you know what you need to do to let go. If something's worked for you before, you can try it again, do it again. If you've been worried before and you used the breath to calm yourself down, well, you can do it again. If you've been sleepy before and you got up and you walked outside and did some walking meditation and got rid of your sleepiness, if you've done that before, you can do it again. There are many different skillful means we work with when we're meditating, when we're training this mind. But if you've ever had some success before, that's something you can remember and try it again. If you've done it before, you can do it again. So the unpleasantness of the mind, the lack of peace, the disturbance, these are things we have to look at and work with. But as they come up, one by one, just whatever's arising in the present moment, that's your teacher, that's where you have to learn. We know what it's like giving in to negative states of mind, because we've done it before, and it didn't bring us any peace. So now we try something different. We try not giving in. We try establishing mindfulness. And it's like a task we set ourselves. How can I keep mindful? Not give in to this desire, this worry, this fear, this sleepiness. And you keep working at it. And this quality of contentment to practice, it's something you have to cultivate. Sometimes you remind yourself of the value of the practice. You've done it before, it's brought you some peace, some happiness before, so you remind yourself of that to bring up energy again, especially if you're facing some heavy states of mind, or you're just finding it very difficult to wade through the mind, the different stressful thoughts you're having. You remind yourself of some of the success in the past you've had, some of the peace you've attained, and use that to motivate yourself to try again, pick yourself up again. Also, remembering, recollecting the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. The Buddha, our teacher, the Dhamma, the teachings, the Sangha, those enlightened disciples of the Buddha that you maybe have read about or even met, bringing them up again in your mind. They've done it. If they can do it, so can I, because we're all human beings. We're all dealing with exactly the same raw materials. We've got a body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, sense consciousness. And no one is any different from anyone else. And if any one of those teachers, the enlightened ones, have found success in their practice, it's because they were willing to train, willing to practice like this. It began with Venerable Kalyano on the first night that the Buddha taught, Asalaha Puja, which we celebrate in a few days' time. He's just the first of many monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen since the time of the Buddha, right down to this present day. Again, our imagination likes to sort of throw up problems, and some people say, oh, well, those were the golden days. You can't do that practice anymore. But the actual way of practice hasn't changed. You can be mindful today just as somebody 2,500 years ago could be mindful. Because you have a human mind, and one of the qualities that you can bring up in a human mind is mindfulness, clear comprehension, wisdom. Just as people in the time of the Buddha suffered and then found happiness through the practice, people in this day and age suffer but can find happiness through the practice. Because the raw materials haven't changed. We're still human beings. Just because we have smartphones and drive cars, and they didn't in the time of the Buddha, these are only superficial differences. We still have a body and a mind that breathes, feels pleasure and pain, that thinks, that worries, that gets stressed, has suffering. That hasn't changed. It's not like in the time of the Buddha they didn't have problems with inflation. They did. It's just they used a different means of exchange. So they had to swap whatever it is, carrots for apples or whatever it is they ate, grains, rice for wheat or whatever. Perhaps they didn't use dollars and cents and all the other currencies we use nowadays. But they still had to do trade. They had to go and buy things, grow things, eat, make food, cook meals. Those things haven't changed. And in some ways we're much better off these days. We've got more healthcare, better education, better sort of systems of government and so on. It's maybe a little bit more complicated and complex than it was in the time of the Buddha, but the basic problems people face are exactly the same. Just because this day and age we have wars, well, they had wars in the time of the Buddha. This day and age we have inflation. In the time of the Buddha they had inflation. Everything much the same. They had disease, we've got disease, they had disease. They had a restless mind, we have restless minds. They got angry, we get angry. They had sensual desire, we have sensual desire. It's just centered around different things, that's all. The names were different. So nothing's changed. And it wasn't like it was a golden age. If it was a golden age, it's because people had just practiced a little bit more than we have, perhaps. There may be some truth in that. If somebody seems to have progressed in their practice, so say in the time of the Buddha, they seem to get enlightened so easily. On paper, in the books and the texts and the stories, it sounds like they got enlightened so easily. Well, if that is true, it's because they practiced a bit more than us. They've done it a bit more than us, so they were right at the end of their practice, ready for enlightenment. Only need to meet the Buddha, hear a talk, and they got enlightened. For us, we practiced a lot already and we still haven't got there. We have to hear many talks and ask many questions and meditate many times, and we're still not enlightened. That's just we haven't done it enough. And this is still a golden age because we can still hear the Dhamma and practice the Dhamma. You're all here tonight listening to the Dhamma. That's a sign that you all have good merit. You must have listened to the Dhamma before and you're interested and you've had maybe some stress, some suffering in your life, so then you want to find a way out of stress and suffering. So you're here meditating, listening to the Dhamma now. That's the results of the good causes in your past. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. But we have to continue because we haven't finished it yet. And we have to learn how to keep practicing coming back to the present moment and not get too caught up in the doubts. When will I attain Nibbana? When will I have Samadhi? Always focused on results. That is a very perhaps a more modern obstacle, because our culture is so results orientated. Work, education, it's always about when am I going to get it, how am I going to pass my exam, when am I going to get the job, when am I going to get the promotion, when am I going to get this, get that. Perhaps that is a modern, we emphasize results more in our culture, so when we meditate, well, it will come up. So people love to ask the question, when am I going to get enlightened? What's the quick way to enlightenment? We love to ask that question. The quick way to enlightenment is establish mindfulness right here, right now, at this very moment, and recognize the impermanent, selfless nature of whatever it is that's coming up in your mind right now. So if it's restlessness because you're tired, or you have some pain in your leg, if it's some desire to go and eat or do something else, you're bored, you're not very content in the present moment, that's what you're dealing with. That's what you have to become mindful of. That's where you learn from your own suffering. Whatever is arising and passing away in your experience right now is your teacher. And really we need to learn how to find that teaching inside and learn the lessons that we need to learn. If you haven't learnt them now, they're going to keep coming back to you. So you might as well learn now. If you're lacking motivation in your practice, it's not like by not practicing you'll somehow avoid suffering. It will come back even harder. You bite you even harder. You have no choice but to face it and learn from it right now. Practice meditation, establish mindfulness now, contemplate to see the impermanent nature of thoughts and feelings right now. Because it's just going to be waiting for you to do this tomorrow and the next day, so you might as well do it today. And what are the consequences of not practicing? Well, we're just putting the whole thing off, and it will only get worse. So you might as well make the effort now, however hard it seems, or however untrainable your mind seems. It's okay. You just take it one step at a time, one breath at a time, one mental state at a time, and you contemplate it. And Ajahn Chah used to say, if it's unwholesome, if it's bad, then let it die. If it doesn't die, make it good. So if you are caught into an unwholesome state of mind, worried, angry, desiring something, turn that into something good. If you can establish mindfulness and see that thought as something that's arising, passing away, as temporary, and therefore is not really a self because it's temporary. If you can do that, you're turning even in the worst thought, the worst mental state into something good. You have to apply your mind. That's what we call practice. Turning suffering into wisdom, into understanding. Whatever arises, ceases, will pass away. You don't have to concern yourself with what hasn't arisen. Really, the place of practice is what's arising right here, right now. And learning to see it in its true light, rather than in the light of delusion, ignorance. Delusion is deluding. When we're deluded, we don't see things. We don't see suffering as suffering. We get caught into endless moods and reactions. But when we establish mindfulness and clear comprehension, it cuts through delusions. So you see craving and attachment as suffering. So if you have an angry thought, you know this is suffering, this is to be abandoned. When there's no delusion, you'll do that. When you see things disappear, you see suffering disappear, what's left is the spaciousness, the happiness of the mind, non-attached, mindful, aware, seeing things truly as they are. In the end, suffering is so easily punctured. It's just delusions that we build up in the mind. Streams of thoughts, imagination, perceptions that we hold on to. Even the thought, I am suffering, is just a thought, isn't it? It's that you add on to experience. If you're experiencing a mental state that's not very pleasant, you're irritated, you're restless, you're agitated, anxious. As soon as you establish mindfulness, you know this is just thinking. Maybe there's some unpleasant feeling with it, but that's all it is. Thinking with some unpleasant feeling, unpleasant emotion. And then you drop it because you establish mindfulness. That's all it is. So then the thought, I am suffering, my life is suffering, I have this problem, these are just thoughts, aren't they? They arise, they pass away. If you can see that, then they pass away and they don't arise again, because you know them. Sure, some things are difficult in life. We still have to go about our business, earn our living, put our robes on if you're struggling with your robes. There are those practical issues are still there, but the real suffering is in our mind, isn't it? What we think about things, what we add on, the add-ons of life, the extensions and add-ons of suffering. This is the miracle of mindfulness. It removes the add-ons and the extensions and the embellishments and all the extra descriptions that we add on to things, and then our experience just becomes as it is. Our thought just becomes a thought, a feeling just a feeling. Painful feeling is painful, but it's just a feeling. Pleasant feeling is just pleasant feeling. What we think about it is just what we think about it. That's all. It's just that much. Learning to see that over and over again so your mind becomes clear. Oh, it's just thought, just perceptions. It's nothing too real, doesn't have any real substance to it. So maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight.